Joey, welcome to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
So my name's Joey Coleman. I'm a professional speaker and I help companies to keep their customers. I do that with a methodology I've developed over the last 15 to 20 years now that I call the first 100 days. So what are you doing after the sale in the first 100 days of the customer relationship to create a connection, a foundation that is so remarkable, that is so amazing that the customer doesn't want to do anything but continue to do business with you?
I love that. I love the work that you do. It's inspiring. And
Oh,
just
thank
for
you.
the record, for people who can see and for people who can't see and are just listening, you wrote a fantastic, phenomenal book,
Thank you.
Never Lose a Customer Again, which goes right in alignment with what you just said, which also hit some bestseller extravaganza.
Yes, we were very happy. We made it up to #2 on the Wall Street Journal, which was very exciting, and
Phenomenal.
appreciate all the support from folks like you who were kind enough to promote the book, tell people about the book, read the book, that kind of thing. It takes a village, and I was very thankful that I had an amazing village that was willing to help out with this. So
Well,
it was
it's
very exciting.
easy when you have a message that serves so well and so forcefully to your audience in such a great way. And the reason for listeners and for viewers, the reason that I wanted to have this conversation with you for this podcast is part of what you do, and actually what you do with clients lends to brand invincibility.
Mm,
Customer experience, keep retaining customers that are advocates and emotionally tied to your brand. When something goes wrong, whether it's a viral issue or a crisis, you have the benefit of the doubt. You have an advocacy behind your brand that will support you because they know you, they've experienced you in all of the wonderful ways. And
absolutely.
the other part of that is that your approach is cultural. It's not about the experience or a one-off. It's about living and breathing this culture that has this mindset. And Crisis Ready is not a crisis management plan that sits on a shelf. It's a culture. It's a culture that puts people above process and bottom line, always. It's a culture that sees opportunity through, no matter the situation. Through the easy part is when it's a good situation. The not so easy part is training and empowering the mindset to find opportunity when things aren't going as opportunistically as you may hope.
Sure,
And you are all about that.
sure.
So thank you for
Well, thank you.
adding.
I really appreciate that. And I'm a huge fan of you and your work and your book. And I agree with you. I mean, I think of it as if you have a remarkable customer experience, you're making deposits into the karmic bank account so that when things go wrong, the presumption is that you're a good company, you're a good person. Yeah, life happens.
And we're going to wait to hear from you.
Right? Yeah. It doesn't immediately jump to, oh my gosh, it proves the point. I knew they were miserable. It's like, no, this becomes an anomaly. And a
Yeah.
crisis becomes something that stands out from the rest of the experience they've had. And in my personal opinion, and I realize some folks may think this is a little Pollyannish, my personal opinion is most people on the planet are good. They're
Yeah.
just trying to do the right thing. Most
Yeah.
companies are actually good, despite the fact that that doesn't, sell as many newspapers or lead as many newscasts. Most companies, I think the majority of the people there are trying to do something to provide value. Now, we get caught up in lots of things that can distract from that value, and there are things in the structures of businesses that contribute to not delivering those types of experiences. But I think at their core, most people have these beliefs. And if we can just get back to that, I mean, at the end of the day, it's how business used to be. It used to be that your reputation was more important than your price, was more important than the quality of the product even. It was, what do you like to deal with? And I think the pendulum is swinging back to what life was like in, rural America, little small town general store, where everybody knew your name and they were looking out for you to recommend the types of products and services that you needed because everybody was in community and in service together. And that made it easier to weather any crisis or any storm that came through the community because everybody kind of had the same end goals in mind.
And in that regard, so the most challenging types of crises to overcome successfully are things like cultural crises. So this is speaking to that. This is speaking to not having a cultural crisis because you have this wonderful culture that does all of these wonderful things and that looks at life and work and business through that lens. And so when it's not if a crisis or a viral issue were to strike, odds are when you have this type of culture and this type of team, it's because of whether it's a human error or you're a victim of something, or, that's when the crises give you the opportunity to band together with those who stand behind your brand because they know the brand, because it's not coming from the inside out. And if
Absolutely.
it isn't, to your point, it's an anomaly.
Right. Right. And I think it's so true. One of the things that has amazed me about my work is how often people hire me to come in and improve the customer experience. And instead, we end up having the bulk of the initial conversations being about the employee experience and the coworker experience, because you can't ask your employees to deliver a remarkable experience for your customers if they don't know what a remarkable experience is. If they're not experiencing a remarkable experience every day when they come to work, it's really difficult for them to transmit that type of energy or belief or value into the interactions with
There's
your
a
customers.
disconnect. There's a total
Totally.
disconnect.
Yeah,
And that disconnect has impact.
exactly.
Let's talk about that. Actually, I love that because a part of the first stage in my crisis ready model is auditing mindset and culture. And I do that to get a baseline understanding of where organizations fit or sit on this crisis ready spectrum, I call it. And it's all about how do you experience, what are those experiences, what's the lens through which you're empowering your team to see different events, all of that. So when you go into an organization, and really what you just said is, in initial conversations, whether it's a formalized audit or not, it is the product of what you do.
Sure.
What does that look like? Because I think audits in this sense, and cultural audits, can be very abstract and hard to tangibly replicate for people who are trying to do that or realize the value in doing that.
Totally. And in my personal experience, I'm not saying this applies everywhere. In my personal experience, often the people that it is hardest to convince about the legitimacy of the audit is the senior management team, usually the CEO, right? And to say like, no, you don't understand. There's a disconnect between what you're saying and what they understand or what they're experiencing. Two quick stories come to mind, and they'll illustrate how I play this out. So I spend most of my time giving speeches. I'm a keynote speaker and a workshop leader, and then doing consulting with clients. So one story from each venue. I had the opportunity to give a speech not too long ago, and in leading up to the speech, the CEO said, we want to have first class Ritz-Carlton white glove service. And he said this about 20 times in the conversation. I was like, okay, I'm getting the message. I've got it. So we go in and we get everybody day-long workshop. We sit down. I said, all right, let's get started. I said, now, here's a question. How many of you have heard so-and-so, the CEO, say, we want to have first-class Ritz-Carlton white glove service? And every hand in the room goes up. I said, fantastic. And you're already raising your hands. I love it. Let's keep it up. How many of you have ever flown first class? Raise your hand. The CEO proudly raises his hand. The CFO raises his hand. And no one else in the company, 100 people, raises their hand. I said, fantastic, great. How many of you have ever spent the night at the Ritz-Carlton? The CEO proudly raises his hand. The CFO puts his hand down, and no one else raises their hand. I said, great, last question. How many of you have ever had a meal where they delivered the food with waiters wearing white gloves? The CEO even puts his hand down. I said, I turned to the CEO in front of the entire group. I said, it's really hard to ask our employees to deliver an experience for which we have no context for. And that was the opening for the rest of the day's workshop, right? And in the benefit I have, and I recognize for your listeners and your viewers, the benefit I have is I'm an outsider. I can come in and say that.
Yeah.
But CEO's not going to fire me.
Nope.
I mean, he could say, this workshop's over, you're out of here, but I've already been paid. Today's spent,
Before
that
you get on the plane.
Right? Exactly. Always.
Yes.
Every single time. And so it may be a scenario, but it's sometimes easier for an outsider to say that. Another example from the consulting business, we bring everybody in. And I always tell the senior management team, if at any point in this day-long workshop with your team, I feel that your presence in the room is hurting the conversation, I will ask you to leave. I'll bring you back. But there may be a time where I need them to be honest. And depending on what your culture is, if their ability to be honest is being influenced by your being in the room, I'm going to ask you to leave the room because we only have a limited amount of time and I need to work here. And thankfully, I've been blessed with an ability to read the energy of the room quickly and effectively. At least that's thankfully been the experience thus far. And so I can see when we're going that. So I'm meeting with a software company. about 30 people in the room who've been asked to spend Saturday and Sunday with me, as opposed to doing it during the work week. So already they're thrilled to have me in the room, but they don't know this. I've arranged with the CEO that he's going to announce that they get 2 days of vacation for coming in on the weekend. So this is going to sort itself out in short order. Long story short, we're in and we're talking about clients. And I was like, who is the worst client of this company? And I see people looking around and I know they know. And there's a single client that's the answer. I'm watching this whole room and there's a single client, but nobody wants to say it. And I say, great. So CEO, would you mind stepping out of the room? The CEO's like, yeah. And I was like, I'll bring you right back in. Just 15, 20 minutes. Go have a coffee, walk around the block, do whatever. Leaves. And I was like, all right, here, we're going to make this really easy. Everybody take out a sheet of paper, write down the name of the worst client and hand it in. So everybody writes down the sheet, they hand them in, and I start reading. It's the same name. A single individual at a company. Same name.
Wow.
Same name. I said, great, I'm going to bring the CEO back in. I bring the CEO back in. I said, hey, I want to read through some things for you. And I just read through the names. And it's the same name for everybody in the room. I said, so what are we going to do to fire that client? Because if you all agree that this is the worst client we have, I don't need to know anything else. If one of you said it was the worst client, we get to spend some time talking about it. But if the culture is being so impacted by this one client, I can already tell, regardless of what part of the market share that client represents, regardless of what's going on, we're going to do it. CEO is nervous as can be right now, right? He's like, this is one of our big clients, Joey, come on. And I'm like, we're firing this client. We're firing this client. That's the end of the story. And so long story short, about a month later, the CEO calls me, says, so we fired that client. I was like, okay, good. Excellent. I'm glad. Because here's the thing. They represented a double-digit percentage of our revenue. We have gotten that back and more because our salespeople have gone out and found new clients. Our customer service people have increased the share of wallet from our existing clients. Everybody on the team is thrilled to make up the loss financially because they know the company took a hit. What that said to me in that moment is the team was the right team. They were committed to the culture. There was this small little disease that had crept into the business. And I think that happens a lot.
I do too. And not just that though, knowing that they could all have a voice together on something that was significantly impacting their morale day to day, and that leadership would hear and take action on that in respect of them, enabled them to now want to serve the organization better and as a team. So I love both of those stories. I think both of those stories have powerful messages and very real messages. So for people who are listening, who are either consultants and I want to say more, when you're a consultant, I think that or an advisor, we have a power, to your point. We're trusted because we're an outside expert coming in. We're being paid good money to come in and give this advice and help and serve the way that we do. When you are tasked with this internally and you realize that, I've done the audit and within our culture, and I get that our mindset is a little bit off and we need to shift this here in order to build this brand invincibility and put customers first and all of these wonderful things. However, I don't have the authority to sit down and say, leave the room, or you're going to fire this customer, or have the right benefit. Or maybe I have the authority to bring it to the table, but I don't know how to get that buy-in because I can't demand it. I have to prove that this is the right thing to do. Is there anything that you've experienced in working with the people within organizations that you work with that has empowered them to be able to start to put pieces in place to make the change that they know is required to strengthen the culture of the organization?
Yeah. So in many ways, this maybe comes a little more naturally to me because I'm a recovering attorney, right? So I spent 3 years in law school building cases and 5 years as a criminal defense lawyer building cases. And let me tell you, when you're a criminal defense lawyer and you're trying to keep the wrongfully accused out of prison, which is who I used to like to try to represent, wasn't always the case. Sometimes they were maybe a little more rightfully accused than not, but trying to navigate through that, the predisposition for a jury is that guy's guilty. It's always a guy, by the way, that guy is guilty. So what you have to do is build a case for why they're not. I think the same theory or philosophy should be applied in work. All too often, somebody says, well, I don't like that customer. We need to get rid of them. And then they're upset when their boss says, no, we're not getting rid of them. Come with evidence. Come with data. I spent the last month tracking our time spent on this customer. We field 14 emails a day and 7 phone calls a week. That when you equate that to the salaries of the people that are working on it, this customer is costing us $178,000 a month on average. I don't know what the profit margins are, what the billables are, but with this data, can you compare that to what the profit margins and the billables are and tell me if this makes sense? 9 times out of 10, evidence is the best way that you can present. See, lots of times we think it's about emotion, and emotion's powerful and emotion works, but emotion plus evidence, there's nowhere to run. If you come with only emotion, I can counter with evidence. If you come with only evidence, I can counter with emotion. If you come with both, I have no choice but to take what you're presenting me. The other thing I will say lots of times for employees is I think employees fall into often fall into one of two categories. Either they don't want to be the one that rocks the boat and says, hey, this is a problem, which speaks to the bigger cultural issue if you're not creating a culture where employees feel comfortable speaking. So they don't say anything when they should. But then there's also a group of employees that are comfortable saying something, but if you're not willing to act on the position you're taking, then what you're stating becomes a lot less powerful. So for example, being able to say, hey, this is the worst client, this is killing our morale, and this is costing our company we need to make a change. I brought this up to you 3 months ago. I brought it up to you last month. I'm bringing it up to you now. If we don't change this now, I have to leave. Sometimes saying that to a manager or to a senior leader is the secret word that hears them say, oh my God, this actually is an issue. You're not just complaining. There's going to be a consequence. Now, I want to be very clear so that your listeners and viewers aren't like, I'm going into the office tomorrow.
What if they pull
That's right.
that, or what if they call me on it and
totally.
I have to leave?
And they might. But if you believe so strongly, you got to be willing to voice it. And I promise you, there are employers out there in your community, in your industry, that would love an employee who will come to them with an evidence-based piece of feedback to say, this isn't working. This is how I care. Exactly. I'll have sometimes people on my own team will say, hey, Joey, can I give some feedback? I'm like, always. You don't even have to ask. It bothers me that you're asking. Stop asking. Of course you can give feedback all the time. They'll say, well, you did this and it didn't feel like it worked as well, or I didn't understand this or whatever. You've got to create space in your organization for that. And I believe that runs up and down the chain as well. The most junior person on the team needs to feel comfortable telling the CEO the emperor has no clothes. The most senior person on the team needs to be comfortable telling the junior person on the team, hey, you're not seeing the full picture. Let me dial you in on a couple extra things. Again, part of this is my life experience, right? I had the chance to work for the CIA. And one of the rules at CIA is you have to wear your badge. It's one of the things the movies get wrong lots of times. If you're in headquarters, you have your badge on. And when we were there, it was, if you see anyone without their badge, anyone, you challenge them. You stop them in the hall and say, I'm sorry, who are you? What are you doing here? And you walk them to security if they're not wearing their badge. So they promoted this, and I had just started. I'm with one of my colleagues, and we're walking through the hall, and we see somebody without a badge. And it's let's just say it's in the top 5 people in the organization. So I know who this person is, but they're not wearing their badge. I said, excuse me, sir. I see that you don't have your badge on. And one of the assistants with him says, oh, easy. Do you know? And I said, yes, I know who this is. And I also know we have a rule in this organization that you stop. And the person said, you know what? You are spot on. You are correct. He said, would you like to come with me? We'll go back to my office and we'll get my badge. I said, yeah, that'd be great. Let's do that.
Now, tell us about what that led to, if it led to anything. And I'm sure it led to a lot.
Well, it led to a lot for me personally, right? What it led to me personally is if you're not willing to be the solution, you're part of the problem.
Yes.
If you're not willing to be the person that speaks up and says, hey, you know what? This is wrong, or this isn't working as optimally as it could be, or I have a better idea, then you kind of is my personal belief that you only have yourself to blame if things aren't changing in your organization. Number one. Number two, while some of the people might have thought, oh my gosh, Joey, you're you're basically going to get fired for that kind of behavior. I felt confident of, and maybe, and there's a whole lot of reasons we could talk about bias as to why I felt that confidence, right? But my theory was, if you've told me you want me to do something and I don't do it, I'm actually not being a good employee in this scenario. I'm not contributing to the culture. And what it actually did, I think, is it made this individual realize, okay, there's some things about we're hiring the right people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it didn't lead to me getting promotions or anything like that.
No,
But
and I
my
think
hope
it's
is that person said, you know what, our message is getting through.
our message is getting through, and they will most certainly remember you. And if maybe not, 10 years down the line, but maybe 10 years down the line, and certainly, and in an esteemed way.
Yeah.
Because
And
that's leadership.
yeah, and my theory was, it's a singular story that is representative, I think, of how I have done my best to live my life to date, which is, if I see something that doesn't make sense, I ask about it, I question about it. If I see something that's wrong, I do my best to say, this is wrong. Like there is right and wrong in the world. I know that's not popular to say in 2018, but I do
No, but
believe
there
it
absolutely
is. And so, addressing that. Now, that being said, I've also had plenty of scenarios where in doing that, people have said, well, let me explain the piece of this puzzle you don't understand. Great. So then I've been educated so that I have a better view going forward. But yeah, I think it's a long about way of saying that I do think culture really matters. And I think culture is important. Culture is influenced from the top and from the bottom and
Yep.
from the middle. It's not, people ask me all the time, well, Joey, who should be in charge of the customer experience initiative at our business? I'm like, yeah, all of you.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, yeah, but who should be in charge? I'm like, all of you. Like, which part of the answer didn't you understand? It's all of you, right?
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the customer experience and anything from cost of losing a customer, which I know is just speaks to the data, and straight through to why the customer experience lends to, or let's showcase why it lends to brand invincibility.
Yeah, so let's do a couple quick stats for the data or the evidence, and then we'll go into how it all contributes to the bigger picture. So regardless of what industry you're in, I've studied industry, hundreds of industries all around the world. We found that somewhere between 20 and 70% of your new customers will decide to stop doing business with you before they reach the 100-day anniversary.
Wow.
20 to 70%. In banking, it's 32%. In the restaurant industry, it goes between 40 and 60%. Cell phone industry is 21%. Software as a service is 20%. Online info products is about 85%. These numbers are absolutely staggering, but very few companies are talking about it. Everybody wants to pay attention to the chase, the acquisition, to the marketing and the sales. Very few want to pay any attention to the catch, what happens after they've decided to sign on. This is incredibly impactful because many businesses don't get the chance to recoup their acquisition cost. The impact this has on employee morale is staggering because people are running out the back door as quickly as you've brought them in the front door. And if we can keep, there's some great research out of Harvard Business School, Stanford Business School, and Bain and Company that was supported by Frederick Reichheld, the gentleman who came up with Net Promoter Score, that says if we can keep 5% of your customers who would otherwise leave, that's going to increase your profits 25 to 100%. Wow. So this stuff speaks directly to the bottom line. This is not just, hey, hug your customers, love everyone, woo woo, frou frou. No. This is hard, cold data. If you don't do this, you have problems. Additionally, because salespeople sometimes, when they hear me speak, are like, well, Joey, you're all about what happens after the sale. What about those salespeople? We're good people too. I'm like, I get it. And here's how this makes the salesperson's job easier. Again, looking at all industries around the world, the average sales scenario or sales conversation converts on a cold prospect 5 to 20% of the time. Again, if you take all industries and add it together, 5 to 20% likelihood of a cold prospect becoming a customer. If you're selling to an existing customer, the likelihood of converting skyrockets to 60 to 70%.
Wow.
So the salespeople like this too, because your job just got exponentially easier. So that's the data of why this matters. How does this spin into an invincible brand? It used to be that you could compete on price, okay? Because everybody was like, well, my item is less expensive than your item. That creates a race to the bottom on price, and you reach a point where no one in your industry can lower their prices anymore because we're just thresholded out at the bottom. Then we had a conversation about competing on quality, right? The problem is in the 80s, we come along with total quality management out of Japan. And what we end up having is now the expectation is 0 defects, right? The expectation is a high quality product that works every time out of the box. So now you can't compete on quality. Well, then we had the internet and everybody's like, well, it's about 24/7, 365 access. Well, now everyone has the internet. So that's not a differentiator. The last great differentiator in your business, the last bastion of hoping to be an invincible brand is how you make your customers feel. The customer experience. Because price doesn't matter anymore. Quality, they expect a low price. They expect high quality. They expect 24/7 access. What's left? Well, do I like doing business with you?
Yeah.
Do I like the conversation? Are you fun to talk to? Do you care about me as an individual? Can I get a human being on the phone? Or do I have to be caught in this chat-based, email-based, hey, let us quote policy back to you instead of treating you like a human being?
Yeah.
The businesses that are succeeding the most now, and I believe the only businesses that will exist 20 years from now are the ones that place a priority on creating remarkable experiences for their customers.
I love that. So what does that look like?
So I think that looks like a couple things. I think it looks like being in regular conversation and community with your customers. So having the opportunity for your customers to give you feedback and contribute to what you're doing and where you're going, and checking in with them regularly in a really authentic way, not just a BS survey that gets emailed after the interaction that you don't read the results to the survey anyway. It drives me crazy. If you're going to ask your customer stuff, please.
If you're going to ask for their time.
You're going to ask for their time. If you're going to ask for their feedback, at least read it.
Read it. Yeah.
Okay? That's the threshold for doing anything. Acting on it would be even better, but reading it is pretty much the ante-up chips to sit down in the game. So first of all, we need to create those type of feedback loops. Second of all, we need to make sure that our organization is creating the type of experiences internally that our employees can model externally. We talked about that earlier in the conversation.
So essential.
Third of all, we need to look at the entire customer journey. See, most businesses end the customer journey at the sale. They spend a lot of time thinking about the marketing and the selling and the convincing and the converting, but they don't spend much time thinking about, well, what happens after the sale? And we need to look at, are the people that are responsible for the relationship after the sale, do they have status in the room? What I mean by that is, in the typical business, the customer account managers, the customer service representatives are the lowest paid employees in the company. They have the highest amount of turnover. They usually report to the head of marketing, who, by the way, then reports to the CEO. And it's the head of marketing. So do you think the head of marketing is more interested in marketing or post-sale customer experience? Probably more interested in marketing.
Just a little bit.
Just a catchy title, folks.
Yeah.
They're
it's an expertise. Yeah.
And so I think the best businesses on the planet are creating a direct path from the customer experience, customer service people directly to the senior management team without having to go through anyone else, so that senior management is aware of what the experience is for the customer on the front line or in that actual touch point interaction. Last thing I will say is, every touch point contributes to the overall feeling they have for your brand. And every interaction, even the required ones, have the opportunity to be remarkable. What do I mean by that? The invoices you send can be remarkable. The voicemail can be remarkable. Your out of office email response can be remarkable. All of those little things contribute to the overall feeling. It's rare that a customer gets their feeling of a brand, especially one they've been working with for a while, based on a singular interaction. Usually it's the gestalt of all the interactions and how they combine that is actually creating how they feel about you.
Well, it creates the entirety of the experience, which
Totally.
then creates the emotional connection.
Yeah. I mean, we take it to our personal lives, right? We rarely have an opinion of someone based on one thing they did with us or to us. Sometimes we do, but it's usually well, there was that one time where the relationship was a little rocky and this happened, but then there were these other times where it was awesome and it worked well. The challenge is, as a business, we need to constantly be enhancing the experience. So the bad news is there's no finish line. It's never done. The good news is there's no finish line. It's never done.
I was just thinking that. Yeah. It's the
So it
living,
keeps it
breathing thing.
exciting. It's a living,
Culture
breathing thing.
is, yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Absolutely. And okay, so I have two questions. One I think is going to be maybe more challenging. So the first one, which is not going
Is
to be
this the challenging one, or are you
is
going to warm me
no,
up
no,
on the
no, no,
easy
no. I'm
one?
gonna
Okay,
we'll
good.
do that after.
Folks,
How
here's the softball.
because this
Let's
is
see if he gets
big.
that right, and
Well,
then
and
we're going to
this is what you do. The challenging part is changing the lens for my audience for a different segment of my audience, which I want to make sure that I'm all encompassing because it's
Sure.
important. Um, the first one is that's almost can potentially be an overhaul, right? So that's a
Yes.
big initiative. I always say that it's about knowing your objectives and taking one step in the right direction every day, right? Because over time that's cumulative, and that goes to culture and it goes to everything that we're talking about. What are some ways? So for how do you take the right step? How do you, a listener, I would say, make sure, pass this podcast on to all of the different department heads and let members of leadership within your organization as a starting point. Hire Joey to come in and do a training and workshop. Absolutely. And I don't say that lightly. And I actually never say things like that. So that's not a
Well, thank
solicitation.
you.
That
I
is a,
appreciate that.
recommendation, piece of advice. Buy the book. But if you're going to sit down and kind of create this high level action plan, what might that look like? Because it can be over cumbersome, overwhelming.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and that's what the point of, like, there's no finish line, right? This is it requires constant iteration and constant improvement. What I would do is try to find the low hanging fruit that are going to give you a feeling of forward progress, you being the person who decides, hey, this is an initiative I want to do. So there are two key things that I would do in week one, just to kind of shake the dust off, get it rolling a little bit, grease the wheels a bit. Number one, have a conversation with an actual customer. Ask them
Love
how
that.
it's going.
Yeah, go
Ask
figure.
them,
Go
what do you,
figure. Talk to the
go
people
figure.
who
Talk to
you're
the people
trying
you
to.
serve. Yep.
Yeah.
And no agenda, no
Nope.
upsell, no
Nope.
pre-scripted set of questions, but
Human to
just,
human.
hey, exactly, H to H. Everybody gets caught up in B2B and B2C and B2G. No, it's
Oh, I
H to H.
love
It's
that.
human to human, right?
Yeah.
Human to human. Have a conversation. What is working well? What isn't working well? And be willing to go first. What I mean by that is, lots of times people don't want to tell us what they don't like because they're afraid they're going to hurt our feelings or that it's not going to be acted on. So what I sometimes would do in that scenario is I might say, look, we are working on an initiative because we know there's a problem with our call center support, for example, making this up to illustrate the point. Happy to talk in detail about that because that's something we're working on. Or if there's something else that you've personally experienced that you're like, this isn't exactly what I expected, or what might it be? Open a door for them to run through a door that's easy, that you've identified the problem, but then give them the opportunity to go knock on their own door and introduce you to something they've not, that maybe you're not aware of. So first thing, talk to customers. Number two, love and appreciate your customers. How do we do that? Write a thank you note. Write one thank you note this week to a customer, thanking them for their business, letting them know how much you appreciate being able to take care of them or serve them. That's it. Now, some people, if they hear this advice, they might go, Joey, this doesn't sound complex at all. Yeah, but are you going to do it?
Yep.
Right?
Who said it needed to be complex?
Yeah. Yeah. And they're like, well, but this is a big initiative. Yeah, I get it. And let's take one step. Let's take one step with having a conversation with an existing customer. Let's take one step. Write a thank you note. Do that for a month. Write a thank you note a week for a month. Get back to me and tell me how you feel. The average person that does these exercises, not only do they feel better, but what ends up happening is they have a connection to the people they're serving. The people they're serving feel appreciated. And 9 times out of 10, the people that they're serving, then it leads to other interesting, cool opportunities. I've had people take this challenge of writing the thank you note and message me and said, Joey, the first thank you note I wrote, the client called me up, said, we've never received a thank you note from a business we've done business before. We've been thinking about expanding blah, blah, blah. I was thinking about maybe calling you. Can we talk about that? It leads to business. It leads to opportunities, okay? And if it doesn't, let's say you write 5, 10, 50 thank you notes and it doesn't lead to new business. It made you a better person. So guess what? That's got benefit too.
Amazing. Simple, and it really doesn't have to be complex.
No.
And we need to stop complicating things. Simplicity, it's about doing the right thing, the small things every day. So awesome. Thank you for that. My challenging question
All right. Dun, dun,
is,
dun.
which might not be a challenging question, but so a big part of my audience is government in terms of law enforcement and emergency management professionals, and municipalities, cities and municipalities, humanitarian organizations who might be sitting here thinking, this is great because we're talking about business side of things. How does this translate to me? And it does 100%, but I like to
100%.
spell it out so that it's clear and there's no misconceptions, and it hopefully triggers more inspiration.
Yeah. Excellent question. And I believe, a very timely question at the time we're recording this. So at the risk of being bold in my statements, I'm just going to go there. I have experience working in the government. I worked in the Secret Service. I worked in the White House. I worked for the CIA. I have an incredible amount of respect for law enforcement, for people in crisis management, for people who work in government. I also worked as a criminal defense lawyer. Now, some people may look at that and say, well, Joey, you don't respect the system. Actually, I did respect the system. I just wanted it to run as it was designed to run by the Constitution and by our laws. I think we are in an era where there is a real divide between the general public and the institutions of government.
Yep.
And I think that applies across the board. I think some of it coming from the general public is uncalled for. I think some of it coming from the general public is more than called for. I think a lot of the people in government that I know see the pieces that are uncalled for and are increasingly seeing the pieces that are called for. I think the opportunity that's available to everybody who works in government is to humanize the government experience. Okay? The reason why the average person struggles and is frustrated with the government is because they don't believe that the government sees them as an individual. That can change, and change very quickly, when government employees start their day by saying, yes, I work for the government. Yes, I work for this big entity. What can I do in my interactions with the general public today to make sure they feel treated like a human, treated like an individual, treated like they matter? At the end of the day, the cool thing about government service is your customers are the general public.
Yes.
So many businesses say, well, everyone's our potential customer. No, you're foolish. That's not the way life works. It's not that everyone is your potential customer. But for the government, it is actually true. Okay, this is the one entity that everyone is your customer in your jurisdiction, in your field that you're working.
But it's everybody within that.
But it's everybody. If you're in law enforcement, it's everybody in your community. It's everybody who's passing through your community.
Yeah.
I have a ton of respect for law enforcement. I used to work with lots of folks in law enforcement on both sides of the table. Yes, as a criminal defense lawyer, we'd be going up against law enforcement sometimes. But guess what? When anybody in our community got in trouble that worked for law enforcement, who did they come to help get them out of trouble? Well, that would be us. So I had a lot of respect for what they were doing. I think the opportunity for most government employees is to wake up every day and say, what can I do to make these interactions human? What can I do to help recognize that this person who's coming here, who's asking me for help with filing these forms or paying these fees or whatever you're doing, existing in our society in a law-abiding way, that their interactions in your world are very limited, right? You're dealing, let's take somebody who collects property taxes, right? Works in a clerk's office. The people that are coming there, it's probably the only time they're coming there this year, or maybe this is the first time they've come in several years. You're dealing with them all day, every day. So they are new customers. What are you doing to make their experience so remarkable, so amazing that when they're at home with their friends, it's Friday night when we're recording, they're hanging out with their buddies on Friday night, they say, I had my first positive government experience I've ever had. This was amazing, right? That's the power that actually exists in every employee.
Yeah, agreed. And the power that lends to brand invincibility and crisis readiness. I mean, for listeners and viewers who are watching and listening, one of the podcasts within this series is with Mountain View Police Department, and they go into detail on how they do that, how they make their interactions with their community human. And I mean, their PIO now, she was talking about when they hold concerts, because they're in Silicon Valley, when they hold concerts, that she'll take lyrics from these popular songs and ad-lib them and put out messaging with that brings the
I love
community
it.
in. And as a result, time in and time out, whenever Mountain View as a community has faced a crisis, whether it's an internal crisis within their law enforcement that they saw earlier a few years ago, or a natural disaster, whatever the case may be, they have band together. Why? Because it's not Blue Line and citizens.
Yes.
It is people and community as a whole, that everybody, there's this relationship formed that works towards that every single day. And there's a fallback and an acceptance and a reliance and a, not just accountability, but a trust that fallback falls onto. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing your brilliance. Where can everybody find and follow you and find this fabulous, fantastic book that they need to go read?
Oh, I appreciate you. You've been such a gracious host, Melissa. Thanks again for having me on the show. A couple things. Number one, best way to connect with me is through my website. It's joeycoleman.com. That's Joey, like a 5-year-old, Coleman, Coleman, like the camping equipment, joeycoleman.com. The book is called Never Lose a Customer Again. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere books are sold. If you liked listening to this conversation, I'd encourage you to check out the audiobook, because I do narrate the audiobook, and you can jack it up to 3x speed and hear what I sound like if I talk like Mickey Mouse. And so that's fun too. But yeah, it's just, and anybody who's listening who has questions about how to apply this to your business, my email is in the book. There's email on the website. Message me. Happy to have conversations with folks. Happy to help in any way I can. Because this, in the same way that I know your mission, Melissa, is to help folks create invincible brands. My mission is to help raise the bar on customer experience on the planet. I think it's lying on the ground right now. I think right now the typical customer experience is bleh at best and is negative more likely than not. And so if we start to increase the customer experience in your industry, it makes your customers then expect that type of experience in every interaction they have. And so it by nature forces the other experiences in your community to get better, and then all boats rise together. So this really can be about changing the planet and changing the experience we all have as consumers, as customers, as clients, as business people, as an employee, as an employer. We all get to have a happier day and a better day because we're actually enjoying what we're doing and we're delivering a remarkable experience for the people we interact with.
I love that. Thank you. And however I can help and serve that, you will let me know.
I appreciate it.
Your links will be below this video and audio recording, no matter where anybody's listening or watching it from. Thank you so much, Joey, for sharing your brilliance with us.
Oh, thank you, Melissa. It was my pleasure.